Hello and welcome to Skill Acquisition, Sports Psychology, Revision Screencast. What we're going to be looking at today then is we're going to be having a looking at transfer of skills. So key thing, first up, we have a look at specification. What you have to know with regard to transfer is you have to know 5 types of transfer. So you have to know positive, negative, proactive, retroactive, bilateral. That means you have to be able to describe them and give an example of them. On top of that, you have to have an understanding of transfer and how you can optimize it as a coach or a teacher, and also understand like optimizing positive transfer and how you can limit negative transfer. So that's what the spec's saying. Some people might look at that now and think, I have a good idea of what I'm going to do for all of those key objectives from the specification. So if I move through now and say, right, key thing on transfer, we've all heard the concept of a transfer. Okay, so it could be a transfer from your parents' bank to your bank. Okay, so you've got that concept of a transfer there. It could be about a football player transferring from one team to another team. Ultimately, we have to have a process when you're talking about transfer. We're talking about skills. So we have to make sure that when you're trying to describe it, you go through the following process. You have to say that basically you have one skill, then you have a link word, then another skill and an example. Because transfer implies 2 things. So you're transferring from one thing to another thing. So you have to transfer one skill, or you have to talk about the concept of one skill transferring to another skill. And what I mean by that is the link word is absolutely huge, because the context that you're giving the transfer will be dictated by the name of the transfer. So if I put on this then, let's look at positive transfer and see what I mean by that. If you're saying here, so I would say here positive transfer is the process of one skill, and the link word is helping, because it's positive, the learning of another skill. For example, a overarm cricket or rounders throw, helping the learning of a javelin throw due to the similar techniques of the hip twist and the kind of trunk rotation. So that would be an example there. Hopefully you can see what I mean by that. So every time you see something, you should be looking at how one skill, link word, and another skill with an example. So if we have a look then, what kind of questions could you get? So you could get questions along these lines. So you could get something, I'll put this one on here. So describe proactive transfer and bilateral transfer in sport. Use an example for each. So that would mean you pick out your ones here and here, and you then have to be able to kind of just use the concept up here. And then the second part of the question, which we'll be looking at, kind of 1 mark, was looking at explain what a physical education teacher could do during a lesson to help ensure positive transfer occurs for the pupils' learning. So if I looked here, you're looking straight down to this one, we need to know that. So that's just an idea of specification. We've got to be able to do each one of these. So let's see what we can do with regard to answering these then. So starting off, we'll look at types of transfer first up. So first type of transfer we have then, as I've already explained really, is positive transfer. So positive transfer refers to when one skill helps the learning of another skill. One skill helps learning of another skill. Skill mentioned twice. Okay, there you go. For example, cricket ball throw, an overarm cricket ball throw, and javelin. That is an example of a positive type of transfer. Okay, now going on from there, so make sure you get that concept. Helps is the key word there, with a skill either side, with an example at the end. Negative transfer then, exactly the same concept, but a negative has certain connotations. That means it's not going to help. So we need another word beginning with H. So we'll say one skill hinders the learning of another skill. For example, a really good one here, badminton smash can hinder a tennis smash, because often you think, well, hang on, it's called a smash. An inexperienced badminton or racket sports player might, going into teaching, for example, might say, oh, this is easy, I can just tell them to transfer the stuff they did in the smash, but that's not going to work. So if we look at this and say, right, a badminton smash will hinder the learning of a tennis smash, because the badminton smash requires a flick of the wrist. The wrist action is very different to kind of make sure the shuttle goes down, whereas it's going to flick the wrist down. Whereas if you are someone who is doing a tennis smash, you would keep your wrist completely stationary and locked, okay, when you're hitting it. So that shows how it could be real negative transfer. Going on from there then, bilateral. Now bilateral, if you take the word bi out of it, bi means two. Okay, so when we're talking about bi, if you're bilingual, you can speak a number of languages. And we're concerned now with talking about limbs. Okay, so limbs transfer. So bilateral transfer, going across from one side to the other. So what we're looking here then, the key focus is we have to say a skill, always start with a skill learnt with a limb on one side of the body, transferred to a limb on the other side of the body. Okay, so that's our focus. So for example, a skill learned, a basketball dribble, is transferred from the right hand to the left hand. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense to you there. Key link is there. And okay, it's slightly different with this one with regard to skills. So you have one skill you're talking about. We have to talk about one side of the body to another side of the body. Next one is proactive transfer then. So proactive transfer is really, really important here. So proactive transfer is a previously learnt skill, helps learning of a newly learnt skill. So if I just said to you here, what is absolutely vital, and I haven't done it on here, so if you could just make sure, when you see proactive transfer, can you make sure you circle the PR there? Because when you're talking about proactive, it just helps because you've got to talk about your two skill format with a link in the middle. So you've got PR proactive equals PR previously. So a previously learnt skill helps the learning of a newly learnt skill. Or you could even say, if you don't want to put helps, you could put influences as your trigger word. Okay, so that helps you get in there to the answer. For example, as I put onto here, a goalkeeper drop kick in football can positively, or the previously learnt goalkeeper drop kick in football, if it's a goalkeeper and they started to play rugby, could transfer that and use it when they're trying to learn a drop kick in rugby. Okay, if we go on then, retroactive transfer. This is the opposite to proactive transfer. So instead of saying the previously learned skills helping the newly learned skill, we reverse what we've said. So retrospective means we look back. So we're saying the newly learnt skill helps a previously learnt skill. Okay, or you can, if you want to change helps, you can put influences. Again, it's up to you which one you put for that. For example, a javelin helps a previously learnt cricket ball throw. So using the example that we had up there. Okay, so there's some examples. And there are types of transfer. They're the 5 we need to know, and you need to make sure that we have an understanding of those. So if we go through the next bit then, what can a coach do to optimize positive transfer? So what we're saying then is the ultimate transfer is positive transfer, because we want to use skills that can, use previous skills that can help the learning of a new skill. So that is really helpful, I think. And, obviously, if we have a positive application of proactive and retroactive, we're in a really good situation there. Okay, so same with bilateral. Okay, if you're terrible dribbling on your right hand in basketball, it's very difficult then to put it onto your left hand. Okay, if that's supposed to be your strong hand. So we've got to focus on how we optimize positive transfer and how we avoid this. So how do we do that then? The first thing we do then is we must make sure that we focus on similar skills when trying to transfer them. So for example, a javelin and overarm throw are similar. Okay, what are not similar is a badminton smash and a tennis smash. So that is an example there. The next thing, which is absolutely huge, if you're going to try and transfer positively one skill to another, as I said with the basketball dribble, you have to have a well-learnt first skill. It's absolutely huge, because you can't have a positive transfer from the previous skill to the new skill if you didn't know the first one well. So for example, if somebody is throwing an overarm throw in cricket, for example, and they're throwing it like a shot put, and then the person tries to use it, to go into a javelin, they're probably going to stab themselves in the chest with the javelin just before they even started throwing it, because they've got their hand in the wrong position. So you have to have a well-learned technical first skill, and once you've got that, you're way more likely to optimize positive transfer. Next one. This is a key one now. So when you are trying to enforce positive transfer, for example, we talked about javelin and overarm throw, you must make sure as a teacher that you emphasize the transferable element. So emphasis on the transferable element. For example, you're making sure that the hip twist is transferred. Okay, you're making sure that the kind of trunk twist is transferred. You might not talk about the grip, because obviously the grip for a javelin and the grip for a kind of a ball throw is very different. Okay, so that's just something you might have a kind of think of there. Next bit, this is the hardest one of them, and I'd probably leave this if it doesn't make sense. So you also have this concept coming from Thorndike's identical elements theory, and this is a kind of a slightly different take on the concept of positive transfer, because it's saying that in order to get positive transfer to happen, you have to make sure how you're practicing is identical to the game situation you're going into. And this kind of takes it away from one skill to another, and it talks about positive transfer as in from one skill, just only one skill, and it's transferred from practice into a game. So what it's saying then is, if you're going to use this one, is you'd be talking about, if you're practicing passing in practice, you have to try and make your practice games or passing sessions replicate what would be in a game. So you wouldn't stand there with a hoop and one person just kicking through a hoop. You'd have 4 versus 4 possession, because this mimics or replicates the kind of practice conditions or the game conditions that you're going to move into. And it's massively linked to variable practice we talked about in practice types, because if your variable practice allows the conditions to replicate the game. Okay, so if that makes sense to you, do it. If not, this is the one you can avoid because you'll have enough from these. And the final thing is, in order to make sure we optimize the concept of positive transfer, if you've made sure you've used similar skills, if you've got a well-learned first skill, and if you've placed emphasis on the transferable element, then you've got to make sure you connect the stimulus-response bonds. So then you'd have a look at this concept here of positive reinforcement, which involves kind of using praise when positive transfer takes place, and it strengthens the stimulus-response bond between the overarm throw and the javelin. Okay, so that really makes the person think, yeah, that works. Now, if we go on then, let's have a quick look onto here. This is a way you can use to memorize it. When you're looking at optimizing positive transfer and minimizing negative transfer, you can use this concept of get that vision in your head of sweeping the transfer positively across. Get a brush. You've got, I don't know, rubbish on one side of the room and you transfer it across to the other side of the room. Get that sweep in your head, because if you do that, you can think, right, in order to optimize positive transfer, I've got to apply the sweep principle. This is not a real principle. It's a memory method to help you get that concept of moving from one place to another. How are you going to get from one place to another? You're going to sweep your money from your parents' bank account to your account. You're going to sweep a football player from one club to the other, because you're trying to optimize that positive transfer. Okay, so see if that works. Write down the memory method. You might have seen it from here anyway. If I just move on then and say, right, this is your information. This is your kind of composition of knowledge on transfer. Now what you need to do is see why. What do you remember? Okay, so we'll have a look onto this slide now. So if we look at the following, the types of transfer, there are 5 types of transfer. Can you remember what they are? Use this process here, which will be a skill, link word, skill, example. Now I will give you them actually because you'll get them in the exam question. So if I put those on there, I'll leave it there and see if you want to pause it now and see if you can get yourself a decent description alongside the ways to optimize positive and negative transfer. So have a pause now, see what you can remember, and I will move on to an exam question now that you have to pull out the relevant knowledge from this slide here. Okay, so let's go on then. So next one, if we go on to your exam question, oh, okay, we'll just leave it there.